All right, picture this for a second. It's a scorcher of a midsummer day. You've been outside, you're sweating, and you walk right over the fridge, pull the door open, and grab this ice-cold, perfectly carbonated drink. You pop the top, hear that satisfying crack of the seal. I mean, it's a simple, effortless, everyday action, right? You probably don't even give it a second thought. But what if I told you that tiny, effortless little moment actually connects you to a massive, sprawling industrial machine that operates on a totally global scale? Today, we are exposing the hidden engine of your thirst.
See, when we buy our favorite beverages, we're really only ever looking at the price tag. But the true cost, and honestly the true physical effort, goes so far beyond those few dollars. Hiding right behind that single bottle is an incredibly complex, wildly energy-intensive network of operations. Because to get that drink into your hand, that requires heavy manufacturing facilities operating around the clock, distribution centers the size of literally several football fields, and sprawling fleets of large vehicles just crisscrossing the country, burning fuel every single mile of the way.
So, to figure out exactly how this hidden engine works, we aren't just going to guess, and we're definitely not relying on glossy corporate marketing. We're going straight to the source. We'll be using the official Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, framework, specifically the one designed for the non-alcoholic beverages industry. Think of this standard as our totally impartial guide. It's the actual, rigorous rulebook that forces global beverage companies to track, measure, and actually report their hidden environmental metrics. And why do they do this? Because for the big investors pouring billions into these companies, sustainability isn't just some PR buzzword anymore, it's a literal bottom-line risk.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. First, the cost of thirst. Second, powering the production engine. Third, fleets on the move. Fourth, the renewable shift. And finally, the bottom line.
Section 1. The cost of thirst. Understanding the split. To truly wrap our heads around the environmental footprint of the global beverage industry, we really have to split our thinking into two distinct but equally massive energy hogs. Imagine balancing a giant scale. On one side, we've got energy management. These are the stationary facilities. Think giant bottling plants running massive conveyor belts, huge distribution centers, and warehouse refrigeration units chilling millions upon millions of gallons of liquid. Then on the other side of the scale, we have fleet fuel management. This is everything on the move. The thousands of distribution vehicles delivering the product and the transport refrigeration keeping it all cold on the highway. Both of these operations are just incredibly resource heavy, and companies have to manage them in completely different ways.
Moving on to Section 2. Powering the production engine, facility energy. Think about this. Before a drink even gets loaded onto a truck, the sheer volume of electricity, heating, and cooling required to run a global manufacturing and bottling operation is absolutely staggering. And this is where the SASB standard really holds companies' feet to the fire. Specifically, under the category of energy management, it mandates strict quantitative reporting. Beverage brands can't just release a nice statement saying they're trying to be green. No way. They are forced to show the exact math on the operational energy they consume inside these massive stationary facilities.
And the specific metric they use to do this? It's the gigajoule. The SASB standard dictates that operational energy actually must be measured in gigajoules, using what are called higher heating values. Now, in layman's terms, higher heating value just means measuring the absolute total amount of heat energy released when a fuel is completely burned. It leaves zero room for clever accounting tricks. By standardizing this really precise measurement, the framework turns what could be just, boring accounting math into a vital, highly comparable sign of corporate health. It prevents companies from fudging their numbers and lets analysts compare the true energy efficiency of one massive beverage brand directly against another. But honestly, just knowing the total energy used isn't really enough to understand the whole picture, is it? The SASB standard also requires companies to break down that energy pie. They have to explicitly disclose the exact percentage of power they're pulling from the standard electrical grid versus the energy generated by renewables. Since traditional grid electricity still heavily relies on fossil fuels and contributes directly to greenhouse gas emissions, this ratio tells us instantly how effectively a company is modernizing. A higher reliance on the traditional grid, that means a much higher exposure to energy price spikes and environmental costs. But a shift toward on-site electricity generation or renewables, that shows serious resilience.
All right, Section 3. Fleets on the move. Fleet fuel management. So manufacturing the drink is really only half the battle. Now you have to move millions of hectoliters of incredibly heavy liquids across the country to your local grocery store. It is a massive logistical mountain to climb. The SASB guidelines actually classify the exhaust from these large vehicle fleets as direct Scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions. What does that mean for us? It means that because the beverage companies directly own or operate these trucks, every single drop of diesel burned goes straight onto their carbon ledger. Fleet fuel consumption isn't just some secondary issue or a byproduct for this industry. It's a primary, central driver of their total environmental impact.
And here is a totally crucial point that most of us just completely overlook. It is not just about the fuel required to physically move a heavy truck forward from point A to point B. It is about transport refrigeration. Think about how hard your fridge works at home, just sitting there in a cool, air-conditioned kitchen. Now imagine doing that at 60 miles an hour, dragging thousands of pounds of liquid down a 100-degree highway in the dead heat of summer. Keeping drinks perfectly chilled under those conditions takes an immense amount of energy. Transport refrigeration is a massive and frequently underestimated driver of fossil fuel consumption right across the beverage sector.
Which brings us to Section 4, the renewable shift, solutions and standards. Now, this industry isn't just sitting still. These companies know they absolutely need to transition both their stationary facilities and their sprawling fleets to alternative fuels and renewable energy. But here's the catch. If a company claims their truck fleets are running on renewable fuel, they can't just make up their own definition because it sounds good on a billboard. SASB lays out incredibly strict requirements to prevent corporate greenwashing. To actually count as a renewable fuel in their reporting, it has to be produced from renewable biomass, it must physically replace or reduce the quantity of fossil fuel being used, and crucially, it must achieve a net greenhouse gas emission reduction over its entire life cycle. Literally, no faking it.
And you know what? The rules are just as strict for the electricity powering their massive bottling plants and distribution centers. Companies can't just go out, buy a green power label, and call it a day. They have to follow a really rigorous step-by-step accounting process. First, they either generate power on-site, like with massive solar arrays up on warehouse roofs, or they purchase it through formal power purchase agreements. Second, they have to explicitly retain the corresponding renewable energy certificates, which are known as RECs. Finally, and this is absolutely the most important step, they have to permanently retire or cancel those certificates. By retiring them, it ensures literally no one else can claim that exact same megawatt of green energy. It proves their clean energy usage is an absolute audited reality. Double counting is just not an option.
Let's bring it all home. Section 5, the bottom line, economics and environment.
So we've talked a lot about gigajoules, Scope 1 emissions, and green certificates. But why does all of this actually matter to the bottom line? Why do investors care? Well, the SASB framework actually puts it perfectly, noting that efficiencies gained in fuel use can reduce costs and, this is the key part, mitigate exposure to fossil fuel price volatility. Shifting to alternative fuels and renewable electricity is not just a climate issue, folks. It is a massive financial shield. When global gas and oil prices spike unexpectedly, the beverage companies that run on renewables and highly efficient fleets, they're protected from those crushing costs.
It really just boils down to a pretty straightforward economic equation. Yes, upgrading to fuel-efficient fleets, installing advanced warehouse refrigeration, and building on-site solar generation, that requires some really significant short-term capital expenditures. It costs a lot of money up front to build a resilient system. But the long-term operational savings, combined with that protection from volatile fuel markets we just talked about, make undeniable economic sense. You are, essentially, prepaying for stability. Over the long run, those operational savings far outweigh the initial costs, making it fundamentally, undeniably better business.
So, the very next time you open the fridge and pop the top on a cold drink, I want you to remember that hidden engine that got it to you. The massive stationary facilities running day and night, the cross-country fleets burning fuel, the heavy transport refrigeration battling the summer heat. Thanks to stringent frameworks like SASB, the data is finally out there for everyone to see exactly how these global brands are operating. Which really leaves us with one critical question to ask ourselves. Are the beverage companies you support built for a resilient future, or are they stuck paying the high price of the past?